Certainly thankful to be back in the Lord's house. Appreciate each one that has come to be with us today. Certainly hope that God will meet with us this morning. And at the end of the service today, that God will be pleased. I think it is a thing that pleases God when we come to His house. I really do believe that. But I believe He receives more pleasure when we are engaged in the service, when we do the things that God bids us to do. I believe God is more pleased with us when we do that. And I hope that today, whenever we get around to saying amen at the end of the service, that God will look down and be satisfied with every one of us, that we've all done that God would have us to do. Is there anything on anyone's heart before we take up a thought this morning? Anything you need to say or do? If not, I want to invite your attention to the book of Deuteronomy. The scriptures that we are going to read is part of what is titled in here the Song of Moses. What this is towards the end of Moses' time. Moses had messed up. And I know we think sometimes when we hear the stories, especially as young children, that these men that are in the Bible, that they never made mistakes. Moses made a mistake. He did not sanctify God the way he should have. He did things his own way as opposed to the way that God had told him to do. And as a result of that, God told him he would not pass into the promised land. And, you know, some might think, well, that's awfully harsh. But now listen, brethren. Our God that we're serving, He don't play the games with things that sometimes we think He does. And Moses was writing these things and admonishing the children of Israel before he went up into the mountain there to die, so that the children of Israel could pass on over into the promised land. And he starts out, and I'm going to pick up with verse 7 as our reading lesson this morning of the 32nd chapter of the book of Deuteronomy. And he says here this, he said, "Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when He separated the sons of Adam, He set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is His people. Jacob is the lot of His inheritance. He found him in a desert land and in the waste howling wilderness. He led him about, He instructed him. He kept him as the apple of His eye. As an eagle stirreth up her nest, fluttereth over her young, spreadeth abroad her wings, taketh them, beareth them on her wings. So the Lord alone did lead him, and there was no strange God with him. He made him ride on the high places of the earth, that he might eat the increase of the fields. He made him to suck honey out of the rock, and oil out of the flinty rock, butter of kine, and milk of sheep, with fat of lambs and rams of the breed of Bashan, and goats with the fat of kidneys of the wheat. And thou didst drink the pure blood of the grape." Now that's reading down through the 14th verse for our reading lesson. And as I'm sure y'all were able to notice as we were reading through this, it started out talking about them remembering. But then Moses brought before their thoughts some things for them to remember. He said, when the Most High divided the nations, or to the nations their inheritance, when He separated the sons of Adam, He set bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is His people, Jacob is the lot of His inheritance. He started out by bringing back to their remembrance exactly where that they came from. And brethren, I'm going to say this as we begin today. I believe the Bible to teach that these things that were written in the Old Testament were written for our admonition today. They have direct, clear meanings as to what was going on back then, but they have a meaning to us today. If nothing else, they teach us about the nature of God and the way God deals with His people. And brethren, God has not changed because the Bible's clear about that. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. He said, I am the Lord, I change not. So if He dealt with them that way, then brethren, He looks at us in a very similar manner. And He talks about how that He separated out to Himself a people. What a glorious thought just in and of itself that is. That the great God of heaven, the one that stepped out when there was nothing and said, let it be, and it became, the one that created the heavens and the earth, the one that set us on this earth, the one that formed us in our mother's womb. That God would look at a group of people and hold them as being, as the Scripture said here, the apple of His eye, His desire. The one that He was concerned with. But He said that about Israel of old. That they were a people that were separated, that were sanctified, is what the word separated and the word sanctified are sort of interchangeable. That they were the same, that God looked at them and He said, these are my people. Now I am persuaded from what I understand the Scriptures to teach that God looks at a people that way in this time that we live still today. Right. It is not Israel of old because they rejected Him. The Bible tells us that He came unto His own and His own received Him not. But as many as did receive Him or accepted who He was, to them gave He power to become the sons of God. That there are a people, that there is a group in this world today that is distinct, that is unique, that is separated from the rest of this world. I believe that. I believe that people to be the Lord's church. Now, I want to clarify exactly what I mean when I say that. I believe the Lord's church are a people by definition that are following Him, that are walking with Him. The Bible teaches us that there was a group, if memory serves me right, it was at Antioch, where they were first called Christians. They were people that were walking the way that Christ walked. They were acting the way that He acted. They were teaching the things that He taught. That's why they were defined as that. And brethren, I don't believe everybody in this world is actually doing that today. You say, well, no, there's a whole lot out there of other religions. I need to be more specific. I don't believe everything that professes to be a Christian church is a Christian church. Now, I'm not saying that to hurt your feelings if you're here and you don't believe as we do. I'm not saying that to upset you or run you off. Far from it, brethren. I want you to understand what I believe the Bible to teach. I believe the Bible to teach that the Lord established a church while He was here on earth. And to be a part of that is something of great value. It is something that people ought to strive towards doing. That is the people that I believe under the New Testament are the apple of God's eye. I believe they're the ones that are special to Him. These are the ones that He separated out from all the people of the earth. And I don't believe that's everybody that's out here in this world. I don't believe that it's everybody that's been saved. Now that's a harsh statement to make, I guess, in the world that we live today, because people don't believe that. Sure. People have the idea that once you get saved, well, you're just as much as you're ever going to have, and you've got it all, and you're part of the church. No, brethren. It takes something more than that.
Right.
It takes separating yourself voluntarily from the world. Right. You have to choose to do that.
Right.
And it doesn't end at that separation which is enacted in the act of baptism. It goes on past that. There is a life that you've got to live.
Amen. That's right.
There is a way that you've got to walk. And if you turn your back on that, you're not in it.
Right.
And here He talks to them about being that kind of people, and how He looked at them, and how He led them. And there was no other gods with them. But I want to go back to the very first verse that we've read here. He said, "Remember the days of old." Now, I've already made mention that today is a day that we've set aside somewhat for that purpose, to remember. To remember where we came from, to remember those that went on before us. And brethren, I want you to understand, I do believe that if it had not been for those that went on before us, what we enjoy here today would not be. If they had not held up this way, if they had not continued to walk with God, if they had not held these principles up, brethren, we wouldn't have them here today. And as I think about that, I wonder about a few years from now where we'll truly be. See, I believe that throughout the Bible there's a lot of instances where He advises them to remember, to call to remembrance, and talks to them. He advises the church in the New Testament, 2 different of the 7 churches of Asia, He told for them to remember things, to remember from where they came, and remember the way that they had been, and come back to it. To repent of the situation they were in and come back to that situation that they should have. But now listen, to do that, there has to be something to remember. And He advised them here, He said, consider the years of many generations. Now as I read that and I consider that thought right there of many generations, that doesn't just mean that I'm supposed to remember the immediate generation that went before us. Nor does it mean just the generation before them, but it says many generations. And I believe that we need to know and be a people that understand where we came from, why we are what we are, and what we ought to continue to be as a result of that. And you're not going to understand that. You're not going to comprehend that. This is not Bible, but it's an awful good statement. A people ignorant of its own past are doomed to repeat it. And brethren, if we do not know where we came from and why we are what we are, then brethren, we will not continue to be what we are for very long. It takes an understanding, it takes a knowledge, and brethren, we need to be a people that look back and remember where we came from, remember who we are, and remember what it cost for us to have what we have here today. Now, specifically, what I'm talking about is this church and what it took for that to begin with. The Bible tells us that Christ shed His own blood to purchase the church. We go on down through history, and again and again and again you find the apostles that were martyrs for the cause of Christ. There's a book back here in the library that is bigger than most dictionaries that has nothing in it but accounts of people that have died for the cause of Christ, so that this way that we have today could still be here. And I think we need to be aware of that. I think it means something when there are those that love God more than they love their own life to keep what we have here today for us. I think we need to remember that when our thoughts are so many times, brethren, about what we want, about what we desire, about what we think, and not about what we should be remembering. He said to them, "Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee." And I am persuaded that, brethren, that's the way it still ought to be done. I think that those that have went on before us are those that have learned down through the ages. They ought to be teaching the younger so that they know, because you'll forget. It is a joy to me still to sit down with older people, men and women that are older than I am, and listen to them tell the stories of days gone by, of the things that have happened here at Siloam, good and bad, because it's not always been good. But it's good for me to know even the things that are bad so that I know to stay away from it. Right. And I want to hear those things, and I want to be taught those things. And not only do I want to be taught those things, but now I'm at a point in my life where I'm supposed to be teaching those things and calling these things to remembrance. Listen, let's go to the book of Psalms real quick. There's some scripture over here that I want to look at in the 137th division. And it says this, it says, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion." Now understand the context that's being spoken of here. This is talking about a people that have lost what they had. They had it. They were there. They were part of Zion. They were there at Jerusalem, at the temple. They were able to go up for the worship, and now they couldn't. And it was their own fault that they could not. They were the ones that walked away. They were the ones that turned their back on it, and they no longer had it. And he says this. He said, "We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion." Tell us about what you remember about Zion. And then he said this, he said, "How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" Listen to me, brethren. Sometimes we don't think about it. We take it for granted that what we have here today will always be here. There are people here today that can testify to the truth that that's not always so. If you'll hear them. There are churches right around us. Churches that I've been to, helped in revivals, that have absolutely departed from this old-time way. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Turned their back on it, walked away from it. Listen, that's something we need to remember. And the songs of Zion are no longer sung there. And what I mean is not necessarily that they pick up a songbook, the redback book, and turn to page 166. That's not what I mean. But the sound that should go out from the house of God is not being heard there anymore. Can you imagine something much sadder? But there is no other option. Because the psalmist here wrote this. He said, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? I'm going to tell you, it is not possible. It is not possible. But then he goes on and he says this. He says, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem. Somebody might ask a question right here and say, well, why does it go away? Why do we lose what we have? It's because we forget. It's because we forget. Now, we may do that voluntarily. We may choose to forget it. Or we may just not remember and let it slip and let it slip and let it slip year after year and day after day until it just is gone. And we can no longer recall those things. Or we may just choose to turn our back on it and walk away. But either one is the same end result. It is losing what we have. And he said this. He said, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. In other words, the way that I earn my living, my work that I am to do, if I can't remember the things of God, then let me forget even how to make a living. Because this life is not worth anything anymore. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you get what he was driving at here? The thing that was the most important was to remember Jerusalem, to remember God's cause, to remember God's people, to be God's people. And if I can't remember that, then let me just forget even how to make a living, to do the things that I've always done. He said, if I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. In other words, if I forget, if I do not put God's cause at the very top, then let my tongue cease to speak. This life is not worth anything, brethren, without it. There's no value in this world without it. This life at its very best is trying, it is troublesome, it is pain, it is sorrow, it is deceit, it is all of those things that we do not want to be a part of, and yet that's the life that we're in. And you know what makes it tolerable? What makes it bearable is being one of God's. Is being one of His, that we know the Lord and the free pardon of sin first of all. But not just there, that we know that there's more about it. That we have a hope, not just of being all right when we leave this life. Listen. I can take you back to August the 13th of 1985, tell you about what happened to me on an altar over at Piper's Chapel. And you know what? That's not something I'm hoping about. That's something I know about. And when I draw my last breath, then I know what's going to happen on the other side. I don't know all the details, but I know it'll be well with me because that was fixed. And I'm not hoping about that. I'm not guessing about that. I know about that. But I am in this life subjected in hope. And the hope is of a better resurrection. And friends, I want you to understand that that is not going to take place if I forget who I am. Amen. And if we forget who we are. Amen. And if we turn our back on it, brethren, then we've lost all of value in this life. All of value in this life. You say, no, preacher, there's other things. There is not. We are misunderstanding things. if we put our chief joy above the Lord's cause, then let our tongue cleave to our mouth. Let our hand forget what it's supposed to do, because there's nothing of value in this life save Jesus Christ and His cause.
Right.
And if we cannot remember that, then brethren, we'll lose it. We will lose it. I am thankful for the memories that I have around this place, around this altar. Not just in this altar, but outside and around about this church. I'm thankful that when I walk up through this graveyard, we came up earlier in the week and walked up through here, and I'd turn and I'd look at a grave of somebody that I don't even have a clue if they were still alive and walking. If they walked up in front of me, I wouldn't have a clue who they were. But I can walk along through here, and because of what I've been taught, what I've had people share with me, what I've heard people tell, I can remember stories about different ones. I can remember things that have carried down that have been told about them. And it helps me. It gives me encouragement. It gives me strength. And brethren, I believe things like that are things we ought to remember. I love hearing the stories, hearing the tales. And I think our children need to be told those things. But brethren, I'm going to go even a step further than that. We don't need to just always rely on these that are laying in the graveyard. They've walked their course in front of us, and thank God for it. Because we would not have what we've got without them. But brethren, at the same time, those stories that have helped us don't need to just be stories from 100 years ago. Do you remember what he said back there? He said the tales of many generations. You know what that means? We would get included in that. And our children need to not only hear the stories of old, but they need to see it. They need to see it put in practice. They need to see these things taking place in us as an example before them. They need to see us putting the cause of God above everything else. They need to see that. And you say, well, preacher, that'd just be doing it for a show. No, it's not. If you put it above everything else, listen, it's nothing showy about it, but people will see it.
Right.
They will recognize that. You can... Now, somebody may get ill that I'm going to say what I'm about to say right here. But have y'all ever been in a service and y'all have somebody get up and make a talk and you can sure enough tell the Lord's in it? I mean, you can feel it the minute they hit the floor. And then you turn right around and somebody else decides they're going to get up and make a talk, and you just assume they never even got up out of their seat. You can see a difference, can't you? You can see a difference between a genuine person that is trying to walk with God and a person that's putting on a show. You can see the difference. It's not a question of, have I always done everything I should do, but there's something about the intent. There's something about the desire. There's something about the want that you see. Even when they fall, even when they stumble, and they get back up and go right back at it. There's something you can see. And our children need to see that. And to our children, y'all need to be doing that. You need to be starting now. Don't wait till you're years and years old. While you have the time and the strength and the ability, be involved in the house of God. Be an example to your friends. Listen, I am persuaded that a saved individual, there's something down in their heart that makes them want to serve God. That's there. It's real. And some of you young people may feel that way, but you're afraid. And I'm going to tell you something about that. That don't go away just because you get a little bit older. You're afraid of what people will think. You're afraid of what people... But I'm telling you, in truth and honesty, that your friends that you're concerned about, a lot of times they're sitting there looking to you, wanting to see you do something for the Lord, so they'll know it's okay for them to do it.
Right.
Now that's the truth. Be that one that steps on out there. Be that one that's willing to give everything to the Lord, because listen, that's all there is of value in this life. I appreciate each one of you that are here today. I appreciate you hearing us, and I'm sincere. I hope this helps you. If you've taken offense at anything I've said today, then you put that to my charge. And let me, before you even share that thought with me, say, I'm sorry if I've offended. But if there's anything good, anything that stirred something up in your heart today here, don't put that to my charge. Give that to God. Because I can't touch your heart. I can't do that. That's not in my ability. But if God has stirred up your heart, give honor and glory to Him. That's the way this is supposed to be. We live in a time, brethren, that preachers are put on a pedestal. I'm not saying I agree with what Brother Tony said last night. For those of you that weren't here, he did a good job. But what he said last night is we ought to be held to a higher standard. And I agree with that. I agree with that. If I'm going to step up here in this book board and I'm going to profess to tell you how you ought to live, then you ought to expect to see out of me that I'm living that way. I just don't see any way around that. Okay? And I think there should be a higher expectation. But at the same time, brethren, I want you to understand that we have put preachers a lot of times in the wrong context in lifting them up too high. I am no different than you are, with one exception. God called me to preach. And if I've ever done anything worthwhile about preaching, it's not because there's anything good about me or any other preacher for that matter. It's because God helped them and God strengthened them and God lifted them up. And I'm going to tell you, brethren, that's the way we've got to serve God. Not just preachers. Not just preachers. When we look back and we remember those that have walked on before us and we think, man, I'd love to live a life like that. You know how people lived a life like that? By the help of God. Because you can't do it on your own. I want to say I appreciate y'all hearing us this morning. I'm through. I know we're in a time where now you sit here and you go, okay, what do we do next? But let's have a song if we can. Won't have a handshake today, but let's have a song.
Here we often